Hi everyone, good evening. Welcome to the session. So just want to make sure that everybody can hear me. Would you mind just popping in the chat box, just to let me know that people are there and that the sound's okay, and then we'll start. Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so welcome everybody. This evening we're going to be doing a session on using polls. We've got Dan Summers with us. Dan's over in Bristol. And he does poll workshops. He's run leader and he's done quite a few different things, and we'll get to the intro in a minute for Dan. So just to let you know that we're recording the session this evening, going to be about an hour, and you've also going to be able to ask questions that we'll come to at the end of the session. So in the footer of your desktop, you'll see a little bar there that's got chat function and also Q&A. So if you put your questions for Dan in the Q&A list rather than the chat box, it just makes it a lot easier for us to work through and answer those. So Dan will do a little bit of a talk first about using polls, best practice, what they're good for, ways that you can use them within your training and your racing. And then after that, we'll go through all of your questions as well to give a bit more help. So hope you're going to enjoy it this evening. Just to let you know, we're going to be talking a bit about polls. We've got our Helvellyn polls, which are the carbon version, and we've also got our Catbells, which are aluminium. So if you're looking for any polls after this session, then you can come to us and we can help you get the right ones, and also give you any advice and things if you want to start using them. So, hi Dan, good evening.
Hi Kate.
So this evening, we're going to be going over polls. Now, I was having a little look at your list of things that you've done over the past few years, and I was pretty tired just looking at it. Actually, I can't believe some of the stuff that you've done. So things like Bob Graham round, Paddy Buckley round, the Winter South Wales Traverse, which was first winter completion.
Yeah, that's right.
And then also, but what I thought was really, now you've done a 2-hour 38 marathon. I take it that was a road marathon.
Yeah, that was solidly on tarmac.
I was just wondering, like, what was more painful, that 2 hours 38 or the 20-hour winter reverse day?
Do you know what? I actually reckon the shorter stuff's more painful. Like, yeah. I think 5K or a 10K is about as lung busting and painful as it can get. Although the long stuff, it's a different kind of pain. You know, it's much more. You know, it gets sort of deep into your bones, the tiredness.
Yeah.
Rather than your lungs and like burning legs, but no, the short stuff's probably more painful, I reckon.
So when did you start using polls?
So I ran on the road for a long time before I sort of started doing loads more off-road stuff. I was in Chamonix, bizarrely, and watching the UTMB, and it struck me that so many people in the UTMB and in the Europeans, they're using polls all the time. You come back to the UK and you don't see that many people using polls. And I figured that I wanted to get involved in races like, you know, UTB eventually and mountain races in the UK. So I went out and bought myself a set of polls and taught myself how to use them. That's probably 5 or 6 years ago.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
And so you've got your Nordic Walking qualification, but then obviously your strength is a long distance trail running sorts of things. So what kind of things did you do to tailor the Nordic Walking side of things to actual long distance trail running with using polls?
Cool, yeah. So the first time I started using polls before I got the Nordic Walking qualification, and you know and even then I found them great. You know, I had a race where I was in the Brecon Beacons, and you know I'd slipped early on, my knee was a bit dodgy, and you know I relied on the polls to get me to the end. You know, and it really helped. And I still think this day, I wonder if I'd actually finished if it hadn't been for carrying the polls with me. And then I went on this Nordic Walking course, and I chatted to the lady who was running the course to become an instructor, and made it really clear that I was there for running rather than for walking. And you know, she helped a lot, gave me a lot of tips on where to look into things. I did a lot of research on the internet, and there's a few different places that already run courses, me included, on polls in running. And I just kind of accumulated the knowledge over time and practiced it and refined my technique, and then that's what I pass on to other people.
That's great. And we're hoping, like before, me and Dan were chatting before, we weren't sure what was happening with COVID and lockdown and everything, to put on some sessions for people, some workshops with polls. So this is like a good intro session this evening, but hopefully, depending what happens in the spring and summer, Dan will be working with myself with putting on some physical workshops around the country that people can come along to. So that should be really nice. So to get started, we've got a couple of poll questions. So poll questions, just for Dan to get a bit of a feel for the audience and what you guys want this evening. So I'm going to see if I can put these up in the order that I want to. Now, here is first question. Okay, so first question's up. If you'd like to put your answers up, what's the worst thing that you can do with or without polls? So number one, not take polls. Number two, use polls but with bad technique. That's what I did for the first time when I was using them. Take polls but not use them, which I'm sure we've all done, or trip yourself up with them when you're not paying attention, which I still do now. Okay, so we just wait for a few more answers. Can you see the poll up there, Dan?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, great. So just wait for a few more answers and then I'll put the results in. Okay, thank you very much. Right, I'm going to end it there and then I'm just going to share the results. So the most popular thing that people thought was the worst thing to do was to use polls, but with bad technique, and that got 49%. And then close second was tripping yourself up, and then taking them and not using them. And then the last thing would be to not take polls. So just quick do the second one just to see this one. Okay, won't be a second. So which one of these would best describe you? Do you have some polls, or you'd like to try using them but they scare you a bit? Do you have polls but you feel like a bit of a wally using them? Do you have polls already but you just want to improve and be like really good with them? You don't have polls but you want to know what all the hype is about, or you're just here for the banter, so not much on telly, just for a chat.
Really great banter.
No. Okay, right, so we'll end it there. Thank you very much, everyone. So I'll share those results. So it's kind of joint first for wanting to improve technique, don't have polls, want to know what all the fuss is about, and then a little bit about got them but not sure what to do with them. So a good mix, but yeah, a little bit on improving technique and seeing how to get the best out of them, really.
Yeah, we'll definitely cover that on the talk today, and there'll be some stuff that we'll post after the talk as well about how you can what you can do, other things you can do and other things you can try as well.
Right, okay, sorry, I'm just looking at something on the chat. Someone said, is the video or is it just audio? Now I hope people can see us. I think they can. Maybe it's just an issue with one person's computer, but we'll carry on. Okay, video is fine. Right, okay, thanks so much, Dan. So I'll pass over to you, and then yeah, type your questions in and then we'll come to them after we've run through a few things.
Can you Kate, can you have you still got that poll available from the first question?
Yes.
Could you just stick it back up so we can all see the...
Yep. Okay. Right, can you see that now?
Yeah, I've got it. Perfect. So I think this is a really interesting question, actually, because I think with polls and with using polls, quite, when you're using them in a sort of supportive way, like I mentioned before, there's not really a bad technique. It's pretty intuitive. If you run and you stick your poll in a certain way, you're supporting yourself in a certain way. Is it making my knee hurt less? Is it making my ankle hurt less? Where it might be that's sore. So in a supportive way, you kind of it's hard to sort of train that, and you get a feel for it when you're out running, depending on what hurts. We'll come on to the supportive way of using polls and the more Nordic method bit later on in the talk. But out of all of these, I think obviously tripping yourself up was kind of put in there as a bit of a tongue in cheek. Obviously that's bad, but and it's it still happens to everyone when you're tired. But I think the real thing I was trying to get across here was that I think personally the worst thing you can do with polls is to carry them with you over however long the race is, marathon, 50 miles, 100 miles, and not use them, because that is carrying potentially an extra half a kilogram of weight, whilst there's some really good ways of storing polls, You know, some of them are a bit awkward depending on what rucksacks you've got. You know, I think they can get in the way if you're not used to them. So the one thing I would say is, you know, if you're going to take poles with you, make sure you have a strategy for using them and you do actually use them. So I think that would be, if there's one thing to take away from this talk today, it's you know, have a strategy for using it. If you're going to take poles with you, have a strategy for using them and know when you're going to use them. But anyway, we'll come on to that a bit more later on in the talk as well. So I'll crack on and we'll see, that'll pop up again a bit later.
I'm going to make you host, Dan, so that you can share the videos that you're going to show. Okay.
Ace. Okay, so the first question I wanted to talk about was, you know, should you use poles? You know, obviously, if you come on this, I saw from the poll, you know, some people haven't used them, some people want to use them, some people already have them. If you come on the talk, I can only assume that you're interested in using poles. So the potential positives of using them, you know, if you use them in certain ways, they can definitely reduce the impact on your joints. They can be a really good, you know, sort of aid to balance and stability, you know, definitely on stuff like really thick mud. You know, it's so wet at the moment, you're sliding around all over the place. Having 2 extra like touch points in the ground is really, really useful. The flip side of that, of course, is that if the ground gets pretty technical, if the ground gets pretty technical, they can be a little bit less helpful. And if it's really rocky and technical, sometimes in some races, they tell you you're not allowed to use poles in certain areas of the course. You know, up in Scotland on the Glencoe skyline, you're not allowed to use poles on the technical bits because it kind of unbalances you. If you use them in the right way, they can definitely give you a bit more stability and aid to balance. They reduce stress on your legs so that you know, you can run longer into a race. You know, you'll save your legs for later in the race or the challenge, whatever it is you're doing. If you use them in a particular way, the right way, for me, that I'm going to try and get across to you in this talk is, you know, they can really drive you forwards. You know, you only have to look at cross-country skiers and the way that they use poles, and they really, really drive you forwards, and they get a lot of their propulsion from their poles. So that's what we try. That's the Nordic walking and the Nordic running sort of method of using poles. All comes from cross-country skiing. Really, fundamentally, all you need to know about poles is that lots of people call them cheat sticks. Now, that's meant to be a derogatory term, but in my mind, you know, that's a positive thing because they're not cheating; it's legal. And if you take 2 people on a hilly race, you know, that have the same ability, and one is using poles well and efficiently, and one isn't, I would bet my bottom dollar that the person that's using poles well and efficiently is going to get to the end first. You know, same ability. If you're using poles well, it just gives you that extra advantage. So, you know, I think that's pretty much all you need to know about them for whether you know, use them on hilly races. So there are, however, having said all that, there are some downsides. Some events still ban them. So, you know, there's some events that still don't like using poles, and I get that, that's fine. You just got to know what event it is you're entering, what the parameters are. One real issue I've had, and you've got to be really disciplined about this, is if you've got stuff in your hands, it's really easy to forget to eat, forget to navigate, forget to drink, because all of that is a real hassle, and it's really hard to know what to do with your poles when you're carrying them and you don't want to use them. So you've got to practice that and have a method and have a strategy for, you know, how you're going to get around those issues. You know, we joked about it. We joked about it a bit in the poll, but you know, they can be dangerous poles. You know, on some races in the Alps, you know, when loads of people are climbing a steep hill with poles, you know, people have been poked in the face with poles from people in front of them. You know, and people trip up. You know, I've heard people's race has been ended by being tripped up by someone else. You know, that's not being considerate when they use them. So you do need to think about that as well. It's probably less of an issue in the UK, but you know, when you get a stream of people climbing a big col in the Alps, you know, it becomes a bit of an issue. And the final thing to say is, you know, there's a school of thought that they cause more erosion on the trails. Now, you know, I'm not 100% sure about this. I think if you use them considerately and you don't go out of your way to drive them into the ground and dig the ground up with them, I think it's okay. But you just need to be considerate. The last 2 points are about being considerate about how you use them. Cool. So I often hear, like, when you've decided whether you're going to use poles as well, another thing to take into account is I often hear people say, yeah, you know, I take the poles as a contingency plan for when I get to the end of a race and my knee's gone, my legs gone, a bit like I was talking about earlier on, you know, and it's all kind of going wrong. My legs are failing, and I'm going to use the poles to drag me across the finish line. You know, if that's genuinely how you want to use them, you know, that's fine. However, I don't think you're getting the best out of your poles if that is the limit of your use, basically. I look at poles really as a sort of speed machine. You know, you see the racers in the vertical kilometers in the Alps, like Kylian Jornet. You know, he's one of the few people to have gone under 30 minutes on the famous fully vertical K in the Alps. And, you know, he was used poles all the time. You know, the whole time he was using poles to drive himself forward and drive himself up. George Foster, the guy who just broke Billy Bland's long-standing time for the best British time or the Bod Graham round. You know, he used poles right from the start of his round. You know, every climb he got on, as soon as he got on the climb, he got his poles out, started using the poles on the way up. You know, saves his legs, drives him forwards, and, you know, makes him climb quicker and more efficiently. And again, I've already mentioned cross-country skiers, but, you know, so really I think if you use poles in the way that I'm going to get across the day, they can be a real speed machine. The flip side of that is, you know, you go to the spine race, and I've got a little video for you in a minute about someone from the spine race, but if you go to the spine race and, you know, loads of people are using poles, you know, not to drive them forward, just support themselves as a stability aid, you know, because when you get 5 days into a race, you know, you've been on your feet for 5 days, your legs are shot, and any help you can get is going to be brilliant. And on that note, I will see if I can quickly share. Oh, sorry, 1 second. I'll come back to this, but yeah, they come back to this. But there's a good video I'm going to share with you in a minute about using poles on the spine race.
You can find it if you want to find it, Dan. It's no worries if it fits in what you're saying now.
Yeah, I can't look how it's going, if I'm honest.
I was going to say before that we had a chat with Dave Taylor with fell running a few weeks ago, and I guess using poles is not quite the done thing with fell runners as such, but it's quite nice to hear about, you know, with that Bob Graham round. And I know that person's a really amazing fell runner. He's with Ambleside, isn't he, or something, I think. So it's nice that actually fell runners do use them as well.
Exactly. So I found the video now. Sorry about that. But yeah, no, you're right. It's a funny thing. There's lots of the fell running community. I mean, fell running is steeped in tradition, isn't it? So the fell running community sort of look down on people using poles a bit, and you know, and I get that. But I think that it's great to see someone, you know, up and coming like George Foster, and, you know, he's a true fell runner, him embracing that and saying, you know, no, I've got no problems at all saying that I use poles and that they've really helped me. So, you know, I think that's, you know, as far as I see it, you know, that the use is only going to increase. And yeah, you're 100% right. They haven't really infiltrated fell running yet. I think one of the things with the fell racing is that it's often a lot shorter as well, you know. So potentially, you know, the advantage you get from using poles is sort of mitigated a bit, or reduced a bit by the fact you've got to carry them, and, you know, it can be a bit faffy as well, getting them in and out, getting them tucked away. So it might actually be, in the shorter fell races, it might actually be less of an advantage than in the really long stuff, you know. So I found that, can you all see the video? Okay, can you see the video on the screen?
Yeah, we can see it.
Excellent, great stuff, and you should.
So how's things going then, Ryan?
They're going really well. Today especially, the fatigue's really built up. I'm relying a lot on my poles, but...
Well, what about when you forgot them?
Yeah, when I forgot them, that's what made me realise that I'd been relying on them quite a lot.
Did you nearly cry?
I nearly cried, or maybe I did and you just didn't see.
Oh. And what's ahead now then, mate? So I'll just show them you're off up there, aren't you, up that track? Yeah. Well,
Nice
coming up today, what's happening, mate?
There you go. That was what I wanted to share.
Well, tell them who that was, Dan, because you didn't say who it was.
I will. I was just about.
Sorry.
So it's fine. It's fine. So that was a guy called Ryan. That was the 2017 spine race. He was 6 days into the spine race, just about to go over the Cheviots, and you know, he'd been on his feet for 6 days. And the guy speaking was Ronnie, who did the talk last week on Kate's trail sessions. Ronnie was Ryan's coach and was up there supporting him. It was just I just think it's interesting to hear, you know, Ryan was in the thick of it then, you know, he was knackered, and the poles, you know, clearly made a great difference to him on the, you know, doing the spine race. And you see that a lot on the spine race, and people really relying on their poles later on. A couple of other examples, you know, when you do the UTMB, like I said earlier, you know, you've got you only got to go at 2.3 miles an hour to finish the UTMB. Obviously, that's not taking into account the elevation as well. But you know, the poles can make a massive difference, you know, with support elements on that, because you know, lots of people are on their feet for 2 days, almost 2 days, doing that race. So again, the support point comes in a lot with there. And you know, also, as we mentioned earlier, lots of people try to use them sort of to have, you know, support for dodgy joints or as an insurance policy. Right, what we've got, just to demonstrate the difference between using your poles as a supportive mechanism compared with using your poles in a propulsion mechanism, like driving yourself forwards. I've got a quick example I want to show you. Now I'm going to share another screen now, and hopefully this is going to go a lot better than the last one. There you go, perfect. So, just go through. Okay, cool. So hopefully you can all see that on the screen. If you've got a set of poles available to you, or you've got a broom or anything sort of straight that looks like a pole, and if you could grab that now, or if you haven't got it, nip off and grab something like a mop, anything that's sort of that, you know, you could use like a pole. Now, and if you've got a bit of room wherever you are, if you haven't got a bit of room, don't worry about it, and just let me talk you through it, and you'll get the idea, even if you haven't got anything to use, and you're just listening to me chat about it, you'll get the idea. But if you stand up and you get into the position that's on the screen right now, so that's poles vertically in front of you. Cool. Give yourself a bit of space as well, especially in front of you for the next one. So, and then what I want you to do is I want you to, with your arms relatively straight, sort of just push down into your poles or your mop or your whatever else you might have. And what you should feel is you shouldn't move forwards or backwards. You should feel that maybe the poles are taking some of your weight, your shoulders are taking a bit of pressure, and that's reducing the stress on your knees. And this is the stress in knees, ankles, and your joints. And this is fundamentally what using your poles in a supportive way is. You know, you might do this, you know, you might choose to do this going downhill, for example, or you might choose to do this because your knee hurts or something like that. And that's absolutely fine. Now, changing that slightly, you know, if you move your poles so they're at your feet, or maybe even slightly behind you, and you get a bit of purchase and all your mop or whatever it might be, and you give yourself a push with your arms like that, hopefully you've all sort of felt a bit of forward propulsion, a bit of like momentum going forward, and you might have even taken a step forward. Now, that when you plant your poles in that way and you push on them, that gives you that forward momentum, that drive forward. So I think that is the where you plant your poles when you're running or walking or anything else tells you most about what you need to know. You know, if you can plant your poles in a way that gives you that momentum and that relief of pressure that you want on your joints or drive you forward, you know, that's really the key to using poles successfully. Now, I have got a quick video here of, this is just a demonstration of, this is a demonstration of Nordic walking. Now, a lot of the time when you're using poles, you'll be using them on the uphill. Yeah, you'll be using them on the uphill. And chances are, you're probably not going to be doing loads of running uphill anyway. You might be doing a bit, and we'll come on to the running technique a bit down the line. But you're probably not going to be doing loads of running. So a lot of your uphill time is going to be walking anyway. And if you can learn to efficiently walk where you're using your poles, and if you look at the angle of the poles in this video, how I'm constantly holding them and they're constantly being planted either at my body or slightly behind me to drive me forward, that's a way to get what you want out of the poles. Cool. Just what?
Go.
Ace. I'll stop that share there. Yeah, so hopefully that's given you a good idea about, about the fundamental difference between using your poles as a supportive mechanism and using your poles as a sort of propulsion driving you forward mechanism. Now, I'm not saying that you always need to use one or the other. It will be a spectrum. Sometimes you'll be wanting to slow yourself up with your poles. Like quite often, if you're going downhill, it can work really well planting your poles in front of you to stop yourself, going too fast on the downhills, to give yourself a bit of extra stability. And it also, it matters where you plant your poles. If you think about it, matters slightly less when you're going up a really steep hill, because you actually want the upward momentum as well as the forward momentum. So on the flattest things, you need to have the poles at a good angle to drive yourself forward. Whereas if you're going uphill, you actually want to be having that upward propulsion as well as the forward propulsion. So if you do plant your poles slightly in front of you there, it's way less of an issue, and you'll still get that propulsion in the direction you want to go. So a few things to think about. The angle of your pole is, like we said just now, the angle of the pole is really important. Hopefully we'll watch the video again in a minute, but when you use your poles, you want to try and swing from the shoulder. Try and avoid bending your elbows. I don't know if you can really see them. Try and avoid bending your elbows and sort of using your poles like this, because it's not a very strong position. You'll just get really tired arms really quickly. Your shoulder muscles are much stronger than your bicep and tricep. You get much more propulsion. You want to always swing like you walk. So you want to use opposite arm to opposite leg. So, right arm, left leg, left arm, right leg. Yeah, that works, doesn't it? And try and stay as upright as you can as well, because try and engage your core rather than bending over, because that just lets your whole body work better. You'll be engaging your glutes more, you'll be able to breathe better. It's a whole host of things. Like when you're running, if you're running and you're running upright, your body's going to be working how it's designed to work. One thing I would encourage you to do as well is, whilst I know going out and practicing with poles and walking probably isn't top of your list when it comes to like a Saturday or a Sunday and you want to go trail running, but you really go out and practice. Take your poles out and get on a hill, run up and down the hill a few times, walk up and down the hill a few times, try different things, and try to sort of understand what the poles are giving you. And if you can practice the walking elements, then if you can walk, basically you should try and learn to walk well before you can learn to run well. I think that would be, if you can do that, you'll get so much out of the poles. I think it's also, if you've got, people at Nordic Walk, go for a Nordic Walk with someone, it's great training, and you're going to learn a lot from them as well. So what I'll do is I'll just show you a couple more videos of, we'll just watch that video again. Can you see that, Kate?
Yep.
Ace, cool. We'll watch this video again, and just bear in mind the things we talked about. Swing from the shoulder, upright position, opposite arms, opposite.
Go.
Sorry, I look very serious, don't I? And that can translate into running quite easily. To be something like that. The temptation when you're running is to bend the arms more, because you've got to have a quicker through stroke with your poles. There are also a whole host of other sort of rhythms you can use with your poles when you're running with poles. You can use a double pole plant. You can plant every 2 or 3 steps rather than every step, like I was doing there. And I think what we'll do is, we probably don't really have time to go through all of those different things tonight. What I'll do is I'll post some stuff on Facebook, some videos and on Kate with Kate as well on Instagram. So check out the social media basically, and we'll post some ideas of other ways of you using your polls, so that you can see some other methods to try out when you're out practicing. Nice. Cool. So the final thing I really want to get across now is the most important thing. Well, actually, do you know what? I'm going to slightly come away from polls now. Like, anyone that's ever heard me bang on about running and ultras and, you know, all this sort of stuff, is that, you know, for everything you do and everything you want to do, you should have a strategy for it. And I just think that strategies and plans are the most important thing that you can do whilst you're at home to have success in any challenge you do. You know, navigation, food, you know, shoe strategy, like all of these things, you know, anything you can think of. If you're interested, I've got a blog, and I did a blog on it recently, and you know, and it's, you know, if you're interested, you can have a read of that. But I just think it's the most important thing you can do when you're sitting at home. You just think through, if this happens, then I'm going to do this. If that happens, then I'm going to do this. And you need to have the same thing with polls, you know, 100%. You need to know exactly what you're looking for from your polls. And if that is, I just want my polls to give me some support at the end, you know, fine. You know, I'm not going to argue with that at all. I don't think you're getting the most you can get out of them, but if that's your strategy, that's fine. But I would just say, you know, stick to your strategy. You know, if your strategy is, I'm going to use polls on every hill I get to, every big hill I get to, I'm going to get into rhythm, I'm going to use polls. I think that's a really good strategy, and, you know, that's what George Foster did. And I think, you know, that could really stand you in good stead. You know, so that comes into what you're looking to get out of them. You know, when are you going to use them? You know, and how are you going to use them? And where are you going to store them as well? Because I think a big mistake that people often make as well, that I've made in the past, is, you know, you have your polls out the whole time. Now, I really struggle to, if I'm carrying anything in my hands when I'm running and I'm running down a difficult descent, you know, I'm not as fluid. I feel like I'm going to trip up, even if it's like a map, you know, something tiny. So if you've got poles in your hands as well, it can definitely unbalance you. So you've got to have a strategy. You've got to say to yourself, okay, I'm going to use you know, you could say to yourself, I'm going to use the poles on the hill. I'm going to get to the top. I'm going to put them away, I'm going to have something to eat, and then I'm going to crack on, or something like that. You know, anything that you practice that you know works for you. It doesn't matter what your strategy is. You just need to have thought it through in advance. So that's another big take home, I think, is, you know, have a strategy for polls.
So Dan, say if you're doing, like, you personally, if you were to do like nothing too crazy, not like one of your crazy things that you go off and do, say like a 50 mile or a 50k ultra, and it's medium sort of hilly, it's not a fell or anything, it's just like a normal traily one. Like, when would you most use your poles? Would you use it from the start? Would you use them on the flats, the ups and the downs, or what would your strategy be?
So if it was a sort of, you know, hilly ultra, like you said, my strategy would be, whenever I'm in a position where I'm walking up a hill, you know, I get my poles out, because I just know that as soon as I'm walking up a hill, I can get way more forward momentum and way more drive, and I will save my legs if I get my poles out. You know, I'd also probably have a lower limit for like how long it's worth getting them out for, because, you know, however good your storage system is, and we'll come on to that in a minute, you know, it always takes a bit of time. So, you know, if I thought I was going to be climbing for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, I might say, do you know what? I'm not going to bother getting my poles out. I'm just going to get through it, and I'll get, you know, and I'll just crack on. If I'm going to be climbing for more than 2 or 3 minutes, towards 5-10 minutes, then yeah, get the poles out, and my strategy would be get them out and then get to the top. And as soon as I feel ready to start running again, I'd probably put the poles away, because getting the poles when you're running, it can be a bit of a distraction. For some people it works really well, but if you're able to run and you're able to run efficiently without poles, you know, it takes a lot of practice to run efficiently with poles, to run quickly with poles. So I'd say put them away, and then on the downhills, I'd think about if it was really slippery. If I was worried I was going to, you know, slip down a slope and nail myself when I got to the bottom, you know, or I was really struggling, you know, energy wise or with my legs. Often when you're tired, descending is the hardest thing. So if I was really struggling when I was tired, I'd then use them to support me on the way down. And that the support would probably involve planting them in front of me and, you know, constantly planting in front of me to stop my forward momentum a bit. Yeah, but as I sort of said, you know, there's no right and wrong strategy. It's just that you need to have practiced it and have thought it through, and then you'll be able to implement that on the day. And really, you know, obviously this is the ideal world. And when I get really into something that I want to do, you know, like a long distance challenge, you know, I almost try to embed the strategies in my mind so much that I don't even have to think about it when it happens. You know, I'm not sort of getting to the bottom of the hill thinking, yeah, I need to get my poles out, right? I'm going to walk up the hill. I'm just like, well, this is it. You know, you don't even think about it.
So I mean, we were chatting to Kerry about sky running, and they give you like a little map at the start of those with things like the elevation profile. So I guess that's really handy, because then if you've got a big uphill, then just a little downhill and then another uphill, you know, not to faff around putting them back away, just keep them in your hand and keep them out.
Yeah, totally. And if you do have to, and quite often if you do have to run with poles in your hands, there's a really good way of doing it, I find, is to poles have a balance point. I'll just get my hair out. They have a balance point sort of usually about a third of the way along. So usually it's about, if you've got a pole, usually that's about the balance point, about there. And if you hold your pole, if you hold one pole in each hand there and you just run with them next to you, forwards and backwards, that can be a really, really good way of holding poles, but still being able to run really efficiently. So rather than, you know, so knowing the course and having sort of looked at the course in advance can be really helpful as well, because otherwise you can just end up putting them away, getting them out, putting them away, getting them out. And with the best will in the world, when you're knackered, however far it is you've run, you know, it doesn't matter how far you've run, whenever you get to a stage where you're tired, you're probably going to go, oh, do you know what? I just can't be bothered to put them away, or I can't be bothered to get them out. And that's when your strategy's not working quite as it should be. Cool. Cool. So the last thing I want to do is do a bit on storing poles. So I am going to share another screen with you, hopefully. There you go. Cool. So this is a bit on, I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah, that's on.
Great. So yeah, these are some examples of how you can store your poles. And you know, the Harrier packs that you make, Kate, honestly, I think they're great. The variety of ways that you can store your poles and the different methods, I think, is probably better than any other pack I've seen. So, you know, you can put them, the first one is putting them on the bottom at the back. Then secondly, you can split them to be one on each side, or you can put them forwards and backwards along the bottom as well, so front to back. You know, there is no right and wrong way to do it, and how you run and what you do with your arms will massively influence where's best to store your poles. You know, so I'll just come out of this quickly. If you're running, you know, if you're running and your arms come across like that, it might not be so good storing them down your front because you might hit your hands on them. But this is, you know, but then it might be better to store them on the back. So all of these things play into it. And really the take home message from that is, you know, make sure you practice, you know, so make sure you practice using your poles and storing them and getting them out. And, you know, I get that, you know, to be honest with you, being perfectly honest, I hate, you know, if I'm going out for a run in Bristol on the local trails, I don't think, oh yeah, I'm going to take my poles with me and I'm going to practice, you know, I'm going to practice using my poles. I don't find it particularly inspiring, you know, on the local trails in Bristol, you know, making myself constantly get my poles off and up my rucksack, you know, straighten them out so I do it efficiently. But it's so useful. It's so useful, you know, even just before you've got a race or before you've got a challenge, you know, in a couple of long runs, take your poles out and just make yourself get them out and put them away, you know, 5 or 6 times in that run, you know, and use them, because using poles is hard on your shoulders, you know, it's hard on your chest. And I actually reckon one of the challenges I've DNF'd or not finished was, I actually reckon one of the factors was that I hadn't trained my upper body at all. I hadn't practiced using my poles. I just sort of thought, oh, well, I know how to use poles. It doesn't matter. You know, I know the technique. I got them out, I used them from the start. 7 hours into this challenge, my upper body was wrecked. You know, it was like I'd been sat on by like a gorilla or something. I couldn't really, you know, I was struggling to breathe. I was hunched over. And so, you know, you do need to practice using them to get those muscles accustomed to doing it for however long you want to do it. And also to get the techniques doing it, to get the techniques right.
We've had a few questions on strength, but could I ask you to do something quick, Dan, if you don't mind?
Yeah, sure.
I had Harry's just mentioned about holding the straps, and
Yes.
with these loops, depending on which poles you've got, whether you've got glove system or loop system. Now, when I first got poles pre-Harry days, I held them completely wrong, and then I went on a Nordic Walking course and somebody told me the proper way. Could you just demo to people the incorrect way of holding them?
Yeah, sure. So there's a few things to say about holding your poles. The way that I always hold them, and the way that, you know, if you learn about Nordic Walking, and if you're a skier as well, probably, you know, you're going to hold them like this. You get the loop, okay, and you go from the bottom like that, and then you want to grab down over the top of the pole. And the advantage of that is that you can basically hold the pole with very, very little effort from your hand. And so you know, if you're gripping a pole really tightly, like, you know, like that for 24 hours, your knuckles and your arms are going to be wrecked. You know, whereas if you can hold your poles, you go through the bottom and come down on them like that, hold your poles like that, you know, you really don't have to use much effort to grip them. And it makes a massive difference. I have heard people say, oh yeah, but you know, what happens if you need to get rid of your poles quickly? Like, you know, you're about to trip up, or, you know, you're on technical terrain. And to that, you know, I say fine. I mean, you know, I say fine. If you're worried that you're going to trip up on a certain point, you know, just take your hand out, you know, hold them like this, really, you know, for a short period of time. And you know, and that can make, and you know, if you think you're entering a bit of technical terrain and you're worried about tripping up with your poles, you know, just take your hand out of the loop. I think quite honestly, I think the worst thing you can do is to hold the poles by putting your hand through the top and just grabbing on like that.
That's what I used to do for a long time.
Yeah, but the thing is I get why people do it. Like I get it, but it doesn't give you any advantage. But then you've also got the disadvantage of not really being able to get rid of the pole if you want to. So it doesn't give you, you know, it doesn't give you the benefits, but it gives you all the negative sides of it. Another thing I'd say, which I think is, you know, really great about the Harrier poles as well, is this bit at the bottom, this like extended handle. Because if you're running along, I'm going to use an example of a race I've done now, but you know, on the coast path, you know, if you're running along a coast path, you know, generally the profile of a coast path is like that, you know, and you might have a path in the middle. So if you want to use the pole on the upper side, it's going to be really big advantage to be able to hold it a bit lower. So take your hand out of the pole and just hold it a bit lower, and then you don't have to adjust the length of the pole, but you can still use it without having one hand up here and one hand down here. So I would say, you know, try and use the whole length of the handle to try and get the best out of your poles. Is there anything else? More or less, that's come to the end of the stuff that I wanted to say.
Well, we've got a few questions that lead on quite nicely from some of the stuff you've just been covering. So if you're happy with that, then I'll sort of go on to those, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
On that handle that you've just spoken about, sorry, I can't find the person who asked, but I saw it earlier. Oh, here we go, Kieran. So Kieran was asking about the difference in length, so about shortening the poles to go uphill, and then some people say that you should lengthen them to go downhill, but it's a bit of a faff, isn't it? You're not going to be doing that when you're tired. So what do you do? Do you think people should change the length if they can, or just kind of strategies to get around it?
So what some of my sets of poles are, in fact, most of my sets of poles are fixed length ones, and a lot of the ones are, you know, and so you have to tie your colors, you have to choose before you go out, you know, how long you want the length to be. Now, if you I think you have to think about the length in the context of what it is you're going to be doing and how you want to use them. So if you're going to be doing loads, if you're just going to be using them for climbing, you are going to want to have them a little bit shorter than the recommendation. And if you're going to be, but if you're going to be using them for all round, you know, from the standard recommendation that on the Nordic Walking, you know, not for the Nordic Walking poles. But if you're going to use them for all round stuff, you might want to have them a little bit longer. I think I agree with you, Kate, that whilst it's incredibly easy with these poles and, you know, to change the length of them, you know, are you going to do that in a race when you're tired? You know, and if your hands are really cold, is that going to be as easy as it is when you're sitting at home at 8:45 on a Monday evening? You know, it's not, you know. So if you can, my definite strategy in that would be, I'll work out how I'm going to use my poles. I'll think about that to start with, and then I'll pick a height, and I'll leave the poles at that height for the entire time I'm using them. You know, so I would say try and get the right balance of the length with the poles, and don't plan to adjust them in a race. You know, if your A strategy is, so again, come back to strategies. If your A strategy is I'm going to use them on the uphills, but then suddenly, you know, you twist a knee or your IT band's really hurting and you suddenly need to use them on the downhills as well. Yeah, fine, you know, adjust them in the race, but don't plan to constantly adjust them. Would be my advice anyway.
Okay, thank you. Also, you mentioned about your shoulders aching and things. You do any strength work for your poles, or do you just practice them and then you build up your muscles that way?
So I think you know, I think with most runners, you know, doing a few press ups every now and again is probably quite a good thing. You know. Oh
no, not press ups.
You know, as runners, I love to run, you know, I can't get enough of it. But you know, press ups, I don't really like them, probably because I'm not very good at them and they're pretty painful.
But it's your triceps, isn't it? What about those things where you're just pushing yourself up on a chair or something whilst you're watching telly? That sounds better than press ups.
Yeah. So any sort of low level, you know, upper body exercises, any sort of upper body exercise you can do will really help with your poles. You know, you're not gonna get, if you're worried, you know, if you are at all worried about getting like really bulky shoulders or anything like that, you're not going to get bulky shoulders by doing a few upper arm exercises, you know, and, you know, really bulk up the top, you know, but practicing probably is the best way of doing it. You know, practicing using your poles is, you know, you're going to get used to it. You know, when you have a recce day of whatever race it is, or you get to go to the mountains and the peaks or the beacons or whatever, you know, take your poles with you and just practice using them. And so that will get you sort of accustomed to using them and get all the right muscles working in the right way.
That's great. And also, so with Nordic walking, you do burn more calories, don't you, than with normal walking. So if you start using your poles and you're quite vigorously, you know, going up the hills, do you find that you do burn more calories and you need to eat more on events?
You know, it's a really, like, someone asked me this a few months ago. And it's a really good question, because, you know, you're right. Well, Nordic walking, one of the ways they sell it is they sell it by you burn more calories than normal walking. Now, often I think that's partly because of the market that Nordic walking is aimed at. You know, it's aimed at a sort of an exercise for people that maybe don't really like exercise but think they should be doing it. You know, that's a massive generalization, and I don't mean to offend anyone at all, but, you know, the market for Nordic walking is different from ultra running. Now, so I reckon actually that piece of that, I'd love to see that piece of research, because I actually think probably is you walk faster when you're Nordic walking than you do when you're just walking. So you walk faster. So I reckon if you measured the number of calories it took to walk a certain distance, I actually reckon you'd use less calories walking that distance with Nordic walking than you would with just regular walking. So I personally don't find that I eat more when I'm using my poles than when I'm not. I hope that all made sense, what I was saying. But basically, I don't find that I need to eat more. And I think that if there is any more, obviously you're using more of your muscles by using your poles because you're using much more of your body. But if if you think about it, all of the muscles in your body are helping you achieve your objective of completing the race or getting to the end of the course or getting up the hill. And so that's got to be a more efficient way of traveling over that terrain than just using your legs. So I would say to answer your question, come back to it, I don't find I eat more when I'm using my poles. And I probably would challenge the preconception that you necessarily do burn more calories over the same distance, maybe over the same time. I can see that because it's more of a sport than just going for an amble.
Okay, thank you. And so for people who are maybe choosing their first pair of poles, could you tell us the pros and cons, what you think about carbon versus aluminium, and also fixed length and adjustable length and the glove and the loop? So just some of the practical things when people are looking at them.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, carbon and aluminium is all about weight saving, really. You know, it's about weight. That's the major difference. Weight is the major difference. Also, I think with carbon, you do get a little bit more shock absorption. You know, they're a little bit softer than the aluminium poles. If you can find, I mean, you know, I know this is a Harrier talk, but I'm going to plug the Harrier products because I think your poles are great. You know, I think they're really, out of all the poles I've seen on the market, I think they're really good value, and they and I think they're really well put together. I think, you know, given that most aluminium poles would cost the same as the carbon poles with Harrier, you know, on the market, I actually think that, you know, going for a carbon pole that is, you know, a pair of poles for 70 quid, I think it's really, really good value. In terms of fixed length or not fixed length, so firstly, it comes down to weight, the first question really, and it comes down to how much you care about weight. And how much you're willing to pay to reduce the weight. The second one, the fixed length or not fixed length, there is a weight issue here as well. So one of the reasons why I quite often choose to use fixed length poles is because they're lighter. You know, there's no two ways about it, they're lighter. They're less flexible in terms of you can't extend them, but they're definitely lighter. And I do care about weight because I'm trying to move as fast as I can. But I think with if it was my first pair of poles, and for my first pair of poles, I bought adjustable poles because it's really hard. So you can read as much literature as you want, but it's really hard to actually know exactly what size it is you think you should be using. And everyone prefers a slightly different size as well, you know. And so being able to adjust your poles so that you can have a play with them, you know, you can say, well, you know, if I'm going to be in the Lake District, maybe I might want to have them a bit shorter because I'm going to be going up some really steep hills compared with if I'm going to run the North Downs Way or the South Downs Way, where the hill's going to be much more rolling hills. You know, you've got that flexibility. And I would actually say as well, in that when you get, you know, high quality carbon poles, the weight saving from going for fixed length rather than adjustable, it's not massive. You know, you're looking at more or less the weight of a Mars bar, a couple of Mars bars, you know, so it's not a huge difference. I think were they the only two?
Yeah, well, there's some key ones, and that brings us quite nicely on to finding the right size, actually. So you showed that nice photo earlier with your, you know, with your elbow. I mean, you probably show us standing up. How can people find out what, you know, rule of thumb is the right height pole for them? So
there's a good starting point on your website, actually, Kate.
Yes.
There's a good starting point on the website. One way I do suggest you do it. I'll see if I can. I don't know if you can see me standing up. I'll just see if it works. Yeah. So if you stand side on and you have your arm at a right angle like that, you know, so you make a 90 degree angle with your arm. You know, that's about where you want to have your pole. Your pole wants to be, so if you hold your pole in your hand there, it should be about touching the ground. You know, sometimes people have them slightly. That's a really good sort of rule of thumb as to where you should start looking for poles. Sometimes you have them a bit shorter because you're going to do more climbing with them. Sometimes you have them a bit longer because, you know, say you're a really good Nordic walker and you're really skilled at it. If you have slightly longer poles, it can, you know, you can get more propulsion because that angle of that pole when it's in is more driving you forward than driving you up. So you know, it's personal choices. A lot of it's personal preference. But if you do that right angle test to start with, and you measure from the top of your hand, maybe take another 2 or 3 centimeters from the top of your hand just to adjust for the top of the pole. That's about where I would start looking in the region for poles length.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. A couple of people have asked about what sort of distance would you start using poles for them to be, you know, beneficial?
It's a good question. Again, I think it probably comes down to what sort of runner you are. So if it's probably also to do with time on your feet as well, probably more than distance, because sort of you can have a race that takes one person half the time to finish than another, and the person who's out there twice as long would probably benefit much more from having poles. I think if you're going to be doing long walks uphill, whatever the race is, then and there's more than one, I'd start thinking about taking poles then. So if you've got 2 or more big climbs, that's when I would start thinking about, is this a race that I want to take poles on? I think if it's anything, and in terms of distance, well, for me personally, if it was under 20 miles, probably wouldn't take poles, because I probably hope, this is very personal, I would probably hope to be running most of that race if it was under 20 miles. So I probably wouldn't take poles for me if it was under 20 miles. It's all, there's no right and wrong with that, but it's around that area that I'd start thinking about it.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Right. Sorry. Oh, so could you just tell us a little bit about accessories? So when you get these poles, you always get, added little bits to stick on them, and which bits to use for what kind of stuff?
Yeah, I'll just get them out. So these little bits on the bottom, fundamentally, they're snow baskets. You could call them, they might be useful in really deep mud, but fundamentally they're snow baskets. It's quite rare in the UK that you're going to need them. And the idea of those is that if you've got snow, you put them in and they sort of stop the pole going really deep into the ground. They're really useful. If its snow was really deep, you might actually want to think about getting some extra big ones as well. But it's quite rare in the UK that you'll need that. The ends that you get, which go over the end of the pole, like I don't know if you can see very well. It's like a rubber tip, and it goes over the end of the pole, and it basically takes the tip away, so you don't damage the tip of the pole, and it means that the tip doesn't bounce around so much. I've used poles quite a lot in the mountains, and I've never really had a problem with the tips bouncing around too much. I've always thought that actually it's fine, it doesn't bounce around too much, and the advantage of not having to take things off and put them on again is totally outweighs the idea they might bounce around a few times. If you're going out in the city and you're going to be running, if you want to be running along a path or on a pavement, definitely stick these on. It makes a massive difference to how the pole beds on the ground. So definitely stick the little bits on the end.
Okay, great. Right, so a couple of people have asked for running with poles, so we'll put up a bit of a demo, but I wonder if you could just tell us the 3 key ones that you mentioned before with running, and sure. Then maybe we'll do a couple of videos and we'll send it to people afterwards, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So the way that I split it up, so there's no right and wrong way to do this, in terms of running, in terms of like the rhythm of your poles when you're running with poles. The key thing is always, like we said earlier, about where you plant them. So I would say the 3 general ways you can do it would be a double pole plant. So it's a really good method. Get this other one out as well. It's a really good method to, when you're running up a hill, just to put both poles down and push yourself up. And if you plant in the right way, you're pushing yourself up and pushing yourself forward. So 2 poles at the same time. Then the next one I'd say would be maybe try and plant your pole every 3 or 5 running steps, because as you saw from the video, you have to work quite hard when you're running to plant your pole on every step. But if you try and do it every 3 or 5 steps, you still get that propulsion, but it's just not, you're not working your upper body quite as hard. Now the last one, and we'll put some videos of these up, so everyone can have a look at them, because it's, you know, it's worth sort of trying all these 3 out basically, and trying other methods out as well to see what works best for you. The other one is what I call the Gallop, and it might sound a bit stupid, but instead of the double pole plant, you plant one pole slightly in front of the other, and it's exactly like a cross-country skier when they're skating. So if you've ever watched a cross-country skier, and it's worth just looking up on YouTube, you know, they plant one pole and then the other and push like that. So I don't know if you can really see my arms. If I'm
yeah, can, yeah.
But yeah, so they plant one pole in front of the other, and the major push comes from the second one. But it gives you that, rather than having with both of those other ones, the drive is quite intermittent, whereas that one, it gives you kind of two strokes of drive, and it can be really efficient. One thing I would say about that is, if you're going to do that, practice doing it both ways. So practice left right and practice right left, because if you're out on a 10-hour run, you know, or whatever it is, and you're constantly going left right, you're going to do yourself a back injury, because you're going to be, you know, you're going to come out and you're going to be crooked like that. So practice both ways, and also sometimes the terrain dictates where you can plant your pole. That happens quite a lot. So, you know, for example, on steps, it's really hard to do anything other than the double pole plant on steps. So if you're going up a set of stairs, basically, more or less, the only way you can do it, in my experience, is to do double pole plant. Because if you try and do, sometimes the Gallop works, but if you try and do 1-2, or you try and do intermittent plants, it's really difficult. So that's the terrain dictating how you use your poles.
Okay, that Gallop sounds very interesting. So do us a little video, and that would be really nice to see. That would be good and have a go with, because now who said this? I can't, it could have been, oh yeah, Ken. So Ken, sometimes I call it a bear walk, where you put your right arm and your right leg forward at the same time. It's like a kind of monkey, like a Mowgli sort of walk with poles. And when you're sort of thinking about it, you start swinging your same arm and your same leg. So I guess if you get your walking technique as well as you can, because running is really difficult, isn't it? So just make sure that your walking is spot on, and then try and progress forward with your running.
Yeah, I think that's right. And the thing too, it's really interesting, because as soon as when you're doing these, when you're teaching people how to Nordic walk, as soon as you say to them, try and swing your opposite arm and opposite leg, you know, it messes with your mind, you know, and you sort of go, oh, I can't get it right. I can't do it. And if you're just walking down a street, you know, naturally you will always swing your opposite arm to your opposite leg, opposite arm with your opposite leg. And so if you're ever struggling with that and you just can't get your head around it, a really good way to start out is to start out with your, I'm going to struggle to explain this, but basically start out with your left foot forwards, your right foot back, as if you're walking but you're actually stationary, and then your right arm forward, and then literally start walking like that, rather than starting walking with your feet together and your arms together. If you start walking in the way with 1 foot forward and 1 foot back, before, you know, so when you start stationary like that, that will really help you get into that rhythm early on. The other thing I'd say about running with poles is, unless you're trying to do a pole plant every step, which that video that we did earlier on did have that, I would worry less about, you know, occasionally planting your right pole and your right foot at the same time. I'd actually worry a lot less about that. You know, as long as you're not constantly doing it and you're not in that rhythm of doing that same thing every time, I would worry less about doing that occasionally. And I'd worry much more about the angle of your pole and what you're actually getting from your pole.
Okay, thank you very much. So what is the best terrain for people to practice on? What did you practice on when you were starting out with them? So
I'd say go and find a local, you know, field, basically, a park or a field. And that would be a really good place to start. If you can find a grassy slope as well, I think that'll be an excellent way to practice your hill technique. So both of, you know, a flat area of open grass to start with to learn the walking, and then if you can get a slope as well to make sure that you get that idea of running up the hill, and also practice running downhill as well would be perfect. Don't go for any, grass is ideal. I mean, it's less ideal at the moment because it's so muddy, and but you know, it's an ideal place to do it because the terrain doesn't dictate to you where you plant your poles. You're dictating it to the terrain.
That's brilliant, thank you. Okay, just had a few people keep asking about storage as well. So yeah, we've seen the Harrier vests, but there are other options as well. So there's things like the Quivers. Are there any other storage options that you've seen that people could try or look at depending on what they're interested in, or what you found works well?
So I've used the Quiver. Hang on, just have to plug my computer in. Sorry.
Okay. Yes, so like you saw before, there's most race vests have got at least one option of how to attach poles, and then you can also Solomon have got a separate quiver. I think they're about 30 quid, between 20 and 30 quid, and you can attach that on or take it off your vest, and it's a bit like a bow and arrow, so you can put them behind your back. So I don't know about any others. What else have you seen, Dan?
So yeah, so the Quiver, I've used the Quiver in the past. It's fine. You've got to practice a lot with it because you can't see it when you're putting the poles away. There are other ways where I think Solomon also have a system where you put them across your back, or from across the back of the rucksack. I've never used that, but I've seen it. I have seen people with fixed length poles, just stuffing them down the back of their rucksack and they stick out at the top.
Yeah,
so I've seen people use that a lot. I just remembered as well with that, the person asked about buying poles. We didn't talk about gloves. Do you want to talk about?
Yes, yeah, definitely. Actually, somebody did ask, what is the difference between Nordic poles, hiking poles, and running poles? So that could go quite well.
Yeah, so Nordic walking poles, you have a glove. And Lecky do a lot of these, and you see a lot of runners running with Lecky poles that have gloves on as well, and they have a little a little sort of plastic bit that actually clips into the pole, and so you don't even have to hold the pole, and it's attached to your hands. Now it's fine, but it's not very versatile for running, is my view. You know, you see lots of people doing it, but I struggle with the versatility of that for running, and I think that having a decent strap, you know, sort of like this, which allows you to hold them like that and actually not have to hold on to them tightly all the time anyway, is a better alternative for running. Just my view. That's the clear difference between Nordic walking poles and sort of running poles and trekking poles. Trekking poles, sometimes this strap is less comfortable, honestly, and there's less there. Also, you often find trekking poles that are the fully telescopic extendable ones, and they tend to be a lot heavier. You could adjust them really well, but they tend to be difficult to fold down. You know, the beauty of a Z pole is that, you know, you're running along, you decide you want to put them away, and you got that straight away. You know,
can you show them just with the Z, Dan, so that people can see, like, because we didn't see it fold it down.
Sorry,
yeah, compared to a telescopic, yeah, they look like that.
So this is a Z pole, so it's got a wire that runs through it, and you basically do that, and then you pull this bit down, and then it's clipped in. And so that's all you need to do to clip it in, and when you take it out. With the telescopic ones, you've got 3 or 4 clips like this, which they extend. So it's much more faffy to take out your telescopic poles and get them to the right length. Whereas the Z pole, which I would think yeah, that's a running pole really. It's much easier to use in that way.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Right, we're just about coming to the end now. There's a couple of ones that we'll just tick off so that people have had it answered. Somebody's asked about using a single pole. Would you ever use a single pole or always go for the double?
I don't think I'd ever use a single pole. I think it'd be quite hard to use a single pole in the Nordic style. Does that make sense? So I think you might, if you imagine pushing on one side of your body all the time, you're either going to hurt your back or you're going to always be sort of twisting around one way. So if you're looking for a pole for a supportive mechanism, to get you to the end of a race, if you twisted your knee or something like that, then I can see one pole working for that. But I would never, so again, depends on what your strategy is. So if your strategy is support, then one pole could work. If it's to take advantage of the potential speed benefits of Nordic walking poles or walking poles, then running poles, then no, I probably wouldn't.
Okay. Is it all right to use if somebody's got an old pair of hiking poles, just to use them for running, rather than having to spend money on a second pair?
Oh, it's absolutely fine. And quite honestly, if you've got a decent pair of poles, I think there's absolutely no harm in using them at all. They can be perfect. I think the things to be aware of are the limitations about telescopic poles. Are they going to fit in your rucksack and stuff like that? And it's just you can spend hundreds of pounds on poles. So it's all just a case of where you want to pitch that.
Okay. And if people are just starting out, what sort of things do you think they should start with practicing on? Because Jenny's asked for a bit about confidence with uphill and downhill. What should people start with and maybe wait until they're a little bit more confident before they start doing trickier stuff?
So if it was me, I would I'd go to the local park and I'd find an area of grass, and I would just I would see if I could walk but plant the poles slightly behind me. So as if you were going trekking, start out, probably a good progression would be, go to the local park, go for a walk, and start out using the poles trekking as you normally would, so I'm exaggerating now, but sort of like this, straight up and down. And then when you're doing that, just see if you with your hands, the way I learned how to do it was, you have to put a bit more pressure on the bottom of the pole with your with the little fingers. And what that'll do is that'll mean that the pole suddenly starts being held at an angle. And suddenly then you'll be trekking and you suddenly start putting the poles a bit further behind you. And suddenly then you'll notice when you're planting the poles a bit further back, you're getting that drive forward. And I've practiced that, that's the fundamental thing that you can take away from using the poles in that way, is that if you can plant them so they're level with your body or slightly behind you, you're going to get that propulsion. And as soon as you've got that, you can then take that into running, and you can take that into trekking up, walking confidently and efficiently uphill.
Okay. And so just to finish off now, so something for people who are already confident with poles, how can people train to get even more out of using them and to get better with them and go faster?
So I'd say if you're confident using poles already, get someone to take a video of you you're running with poles or walking with poles, and just have a look at it. And I'm not for a minute saying that my technique was perfect or anything like that, but basically just run your video next to someone who Nordic walks, and just see, and then start to think about how upright you are, where you're swinging from, the shoulder. If you're swinging from the shoulder, you're bending your elbows, and also where your poles are being planted. So have a think about those three things would be the things that I'd be thinking about as probably obvious points that most people, not everyone, but most people can improve on.
Okay. That's great. So we're going to wait now and see about what's happening with the restrictions and the updates and things so that we can get some workshops, and I'll promote those through the Harrier Facebook page, emails and things. You'll do us maybe a little video of that gallop. I think that would
I'll do some videos So it'll probably be in the next few, well, hopefully be in the next few days, maybe at the weekend, but I'll do some videos and I'll tag you, and then you know, we can share them, and then hopefully everyone can see them.
No, that's great. And tell people how they can find you with your running and what you're doing.
Yeah. So if you search on Instagram or Facebook for Dan Summers Running, that's the best way to look me up. Okay.
That's brilliant. Thanks so much, Dan. Great session. It's not easy doing stuff about poles, but
it's funny, isn't it? It's such a small subject, but there's quite a lot of stuff behind it.
Well, I mean, just sat in a room on a Zoom session when you used to doing practicals, but
yeah, that is true.
Yeah, but great. Thanks so much. And thanks everybody for joining. I hope you enjoyed it. And maybe in the next week, we'll put out a few different little snippets for people to practice with. Be good to see what other people are doing as well. And I don't know, maybe a few people asked about strength. Maybe we'll have a little look up at some specific strength exercises that we could share as well for people with upper body stuff. I know that my upper body is terrible, so probably do with some of them myself. So yeah, thank you so much for your time, Dan.
Oh, it's been brilliant.
And we'll put this up on YouTube, and we'll catch up with you all soon. So thanks everyone.
Sounds great.
Good night.
Cool. Cheers.
Bye.